"I'll take the cook," Wade Pruitt said, not looking up from his cards. "She's good for another season, unless someone here wants to outbid a chicken dinner." The laughter hit the walls of the saloon and bounced back twice as loud. Bertie stood at the far end of the bar, hands folded in front of her apron, eyes down. Not because she was ashamed. She had moved past shame sometime around her 28th birthday, when she understood, quietly and without ceremony, that the world had already decided what she was worth before she ever opened her mouth. She was 35 years old. She was large, broad-shouldered, full-waisted, with hands that could knead bread dough for an hour without tiring. Her hair was the color of river mud, pinned back with two crooked pins she had found on the floor of the wagon 2 winters ago. Her dress was brown. Everything she owned was brown. Brown did not show the grease. She did not look up. She had learned long before tonight that looking up only invited more. Wade Pruitt unfolded himself from his chair and crossed the saloon floor slowly, the way a man walks when he knows every eye in the room is on him and he has decided to enjoy it. He was not a large man. He was a precise man. Narrow shoulders, neat mustache, the kind of clean that costs money in a town where water is scarce. He stopped 2 feet from Bertie and looked her over the way a farmer looks at a plow horse at market. "You understand the situation," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Bertie said, to the floor. "Harlan's debt cleared 2 weeks ago. I carried it. That means the contract transfers." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. Crisp, official-looking, with a wax seal that caught the lamplight. "It's all legal. Judge Alderman signed it in Cheyenne." Someone at the back of the room said something Bertie didn't catch, and the laughter rolled again. She counted the boards in the floor. 14 visible planks between her boots and the far wall. The door was behind her and to the left. 8 steps, maybe 9. Not that it mattered. She had nowhere to go. She had known that since dawn, when she had woken in the back of the supply wagon, looked at the gray Wyoming sky through a gap in the canvas and thought, with the flat clarity of someone who has stopped hoping, today is the day it gets worse. It had been that kind of year, that kind of life. Wade tucked the paper back into his coat. "Now," he said, "I've had an offer from Dobbs at the mill. He needs a cook for his crew. 6 men, 3 meals a day." He said the number like he expected her to be grateful. "It's steady work. Better than the wagon." Bertie said nothing. "Or," Wade continued, his voice dropping just slightly, not threatening, just quieter, which was somehow worse, "you can make this unpleasant. Your choice." She was about to nod. She had nodded at worse. The door opened, not loudly, no dramatic entrance. The hinges creaked once, cold air pushed through the gap, and then a man filled the doorway the way a mountain fills a valley, not suddenly, just completely, as if he had always been there and the room had only now noticed. He was enormous, not fat, solid, the way old timber is solid, dense, down to the grain. His coat was dark with weather and wear. His boots left wet prints on the wood floor. He had not shaved in what appeared to be several weeks, and his eyes, when they moved across the room, moved slowly, the way a man's eyes move when he has learned that most things are not worth hurrying for. He looked at Wade Pruitt. He looked at the paper in Wade's coat pocket. He looked at Bertie. She felt it, that look, the way you feel a change in weather before you see it. Not threatening, not warm, just present, like the man had decided something before he walked through the door, and the room had not yet been informed. He walked to the bar, set down coins without counting them, said to the barkeep without raising his voice, "What does Pruitt want for the cook?" Not a question, a calculation. Wade turned. "Excuse me?" The woman. He didn't gesture, didn't look at Bertie again. "What's the number?" The saloon had gone the particular quiet that saloons go when something is about to happen and no one is sure yet what kind of thing. Wade's eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, the professional smile returned. "She's not exactly." "The number, Pruitt?" Wade named a figure that was higher than fair and lower than honest. The man at the bar looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you've already decided on. He paid it. No argument, no negotiation. He picked up his drink, turned, and for the first time looked directly at Bertie. Not the way Wade had looked at her, not the way the men in the room were looking at her, but the way someone looks at a problem they intend to solve and have already thought through. "I need someone who knows how to make bread," he said. "Wyoming winter is 6 months. I've got flour and I've got a stove. Can you work?" It was not a question either. Bertie looked at him, really looked for the first time since he'd walked in, and said, with the voice of a woman who has been careful with her words for so long she had nearly forgotten how to use them, "Yes." He nodded once, set down his glass, turned toward the door. "Ezra Cole," he said without looking back. "That's my name if you need it." She followed him out into the cold. The wagon was plain. 2 horses, gray with road dust, patient in the way that animals become patient when they have been well treated for a long time. Ezra Cole checked their harness without speaking, his hands moving over buckles and straps with the automatic certainty of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Bertie climbed up to the bench before he could offer a hand. He noticed. He didn't comment. They had been moving for 20 minutes, the town lights shrinking behind them into yellow pinpricks against the black, when Bertie allowed herself to take a full breath for the first time since morning. She looked at her hands in her lap, large hands, useful hands, hands that had fed 70 men in a single sitting and never been thanked for it. She thought about Wade's smile as she walked out the door, the way his eyes had followed her, patient, unhurried, the way he had tucked that paper back into his coat. "Legal," he had said. "It's all legal." She counted the money Ezra had put on the bar in her mind, more than she had cost Harlan originally, more than she had cost anyone. She turned that number over in her head, looking for the angle, the catch, the thing she was missing. Because in Bertie's experience, when a number went up, the price attached to it went up with it. She studied Ezra Cole's profile in the dark. He was watching the road. She counted exits. Old habit. Necessary habit. The Trang Tri appeared out of the darkness as a shape first. The long line of a roof against the sky, the square bulk of a barn, the pale fence line, and then, as the horses slowed, as the particular smell of pine smoke and cold earth reached her, Bertie saw it. Just off to the left of the house, lit faintly by the moon, a low wall of stone, rough-built, uneven, curving in a shape that almost enclosed a space the size of a modest room. Inside the wall, the ground was dark and flat and completely bare. Nothing grew there. Nothing had been planted. Nothing was protected. The wall was too low for livestock, too incomplete for a structure. It was As far as Bertie could see, a wall that surrounded nothing, and yet the stones were stacked with care, each one set deliberately, the edges worn smooth on the outside as if the same hands had run along them many times. She almost asked. Ezra climbed down from the wagon without looking in that direction, tied the horses with the efficiency of a man who does not waste motion, and walked toward the house. "Kitchen's through the back," he said. "There's a room off it, small, yours." He opened the front door and went inside. Bertie sat on the bench a moment longer, looking at the stone wall in the moonlight. She did not ask, but she noted it, the way she noted everything, stored it in the part of her mind where she kept things that didn't make sense yet. She climbed down. She followed him inside. Behind her, the wind moved through the gap in the stones, soft as a question no one had answered. Somewhere down the road they had come from, in the warm light of the Ridge Creek saloon, Wade Pruitt ordered another drink and did not leave. He did not look angry. That was the part that would have worried Bertie if she had seen it. He looked instead like a man who had all the time in the world. "Where in the world are you listening from tonight?" "Drop your city below." I read every single one. That was the first thing Bertie noticed. Not the size, not the low ceiling, not the single window that looked out onto the dark yard, but the seriousness of it. The cast iron stove was cleaned. The wood pile beside it was stacked to the same height. Each log turned the same direction. The flour tin was sealed. The salt was in a crock with a fitted lid. The knives were hung, not thrown in a drawer. Someone had cared about this room once. She ran one finger along the edge of the worktop. No grease, no old crumbs ground into the grain. Clean, not recently, but structurally, as if cleanliness had been built into the habit of the place and stayed even after the habit left. She opened the flour tin, winter wheat, good quality, dry. She opened the salt crock. She checked the back of the stove for rust. She did all of this without thinking about it, the way her body moved through kitchens automatically, cataloging and assessing, because that was what her body knew how to do. The room off the kitchen was barely large enough for the cot and the small chest against the wall, but the blanket on the cot was thick wool, folded at the foot. Now, someone had folded it recently. The crease was still sharp. Bertie sat on the edge of the cot and looked at the wall for a long moment. Then she lay down with her boots on, because she did not yet know this place well enough to take them off. She did not sleep for a long time. By the time gray light came through the small window, she had already built the fire, found the sourdough starter in a crock on the top shelf, alive, fed recently, the sour smell of it filling the kitchen, and had the first loaves sitting to proof on the warm side of the stove. She had also, in the process of finding the sourdough, opened every cabinet, checked every drawer, and noted every exit. 2 doors, 4 windows, the barn 30 yards east, the road south, the stone wall to the west, visible through the kitchen window in the early light, gray and low and still. She noted that last one without letting herself think about it too directly. Ezra appeared in the kitchen doorway at first light, already dressed, already wearing his coat. He looked at the proofing loaves. He looked at the fire. He said nothing for a moment, and Bertie, who was standing at the worktop with her back to him, did not turn around. "Coffee's on the stove," she said. She heard him pour it, heard him drink it standing up, heard him set the mug down. "I'll be in the barn," he said. The door opened and closed. Bertie let out a breath slowly through her nose and went back to her bread. She needed salt, not desperately. There was enough in the crock for another 3 days. But the crock was not a long-term supply, and she had seen no salt barrel in the pantry. She would need to know where supplies came from, how often, how far. She needed to go to town. She told herself this was practical. She needed to know the layout of Ridge Creek, the distances, the names of the merchants. She told herself this had nothing to do with what the barkeep had looked like when Ezra put the money down, or the way one of the men at the back of the saloon had watched her walk out the door. She told herself a lot of things on the 2-mile walk into Ridge Creek that morning. The town was small and cold and smelled of horse and chimney smoke. 3 streets, a church at the north end, a mill at the south. The general store was easy to find, the only building with goods stacked visibly through the window. The woman behind the counter was older, just with sharp eyes and the particular posture of someone who has run a business alone for a long time. She looked at Bertie the way people in small towns look at strangers, the full accounting glance, head to foot, filing everything away. "You're the woman Ezra Cole brought back," she said, not unkindly, just plainly. "I'm looking for salt," Bertie said, "and to know what you carry regular." The woman, her name was Mrs. Aldred, she said it without being asked, wrote down the order without comment. But as she was wrapping the salt block in cloth, she said, still looking at her hands, "You seem like a sensible woman." Bertie waited. "Ezra Cole is a good man." She set the package on the counter. "But good men in this county have a way of attracting bad attention. You understand me." "Not yet," Bertie said. Mrs. Aldred looked up then, directly. "Wade Pruitt has not left town. He's been at the saloon 3 nights running, drinking slow." She paused. "Wade Pruitt doesn't drink slow unless he's waiting for something." Bertie picked up the salt. "What does he want?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Mrs. Aldred folded her hands on the counter. "Some folks say he wants the contract honored. Some folks say it's not about the contract at all." She looked toward the window, then back. "Ezra's land sits above a creek that runs year-round. Only water source on this side of the ridge that doesn't freeze in January." A beat. "Wade's been talking to the railroad surveyor who came through in September." The word railroad sat in the air between them. Bertie set coins on the counter exactly the right amount. She picked up the salt block and turned toward the door. "Thank you," she said. "Careful on the road back," Mrs. Aldred said, "and not because of the weather." Bertie walked the 2 miles back with the salt block under her arm, and the information from Mrs. Aldred sorted into piles in her mind, the way she sorted ingredients before a big cook. This pile safe, this pile unknown, this pile handled carefully, the railroad, year-round water, Wade Pruitt drinking slow. She was not afraid. She had learned somewhere around her 22nd birthday that fear was a tax she could not afford to keep paying on things she had not yet confirmed. She would confirm first. She would feel later. What she felt instead was the familiar and specific sensation of being a piece on a board that larger hands were moving. She had felt it before. When Harlan lost her in the card game, when Wade produced the wax-sealed paper in the saloon, when Ezra Cole put money on the bar without explaining why. She was 35 years old, and she had been a piece on other people's boards for most of those years. She did not yet know that this particular board was different. She turned onto the track that led up to the farm and stopped. A man was standing at the fork in the road, young, lean, wearing a coat, with Wade Pruitt's wagon company stitched on the breast pocket. He was not blocking her path. He was simply standing where she could not miss him. He looked at her, tipped his hat, a mockery of politeness. "Miss Bertie," he said, "Mr. Pruitt says hello. Says he hopes you've settled in comfortable." The smile did not reach his eyes. "Says he'll be up this way soon, just to talk." He stepped aside. Bertie walked past him without speaking, without changing her pace, without letting her jaw tighten. She was very careful about the jaw because that was where it showed first. She walked up the track. She walked into the kitchen. She put the salt away. She stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking out at the stone wall in the afternoon light. Ezra was in the far field, mending a fence line alone, his back to the house. She looked at the salt crock, at the sourdough on the shelf, at the tidy, serious kitchen that someone had once cared about. She began to make soup. It is easy, isn't it, to walk past someone the world has decided doesn't matter. Easy to look away. Easy to let the crowd's laughter tell you what to think. Easy to mistake silence for emptiness and stillness for nothing. But ask yourself, honestly, when was the last time someone stood up in a room full of noise and chose the quiet one? When was the last time someone chose you not because you were convenient, not because you were useful, but because they looked and they saw? That is not a small thing. That has never been a small thing. What would you have done in that saloon? Would you have turned away, or would you have been the one who stayed? 3 days passed before Bertie understood the rhythm of the place, not because it was complicated, because she had taught herself long ago not to learn a place too quickly. Learning a place meant settling into it. Settling into it meant believing she would stay. Believing she would stay had cost her more than she intended to pay, more than once. So she learned slowly, deliberately, the way you test ice before you put your weight on it. Morning. Ezra rose before light. She heard his boots on the floorboards, heavy, even unhurried, and the sound of the back door, and then silence from the barn for an hour before the horses were brought out. He drank his coffee standing at the door, looking east. He did not speak until spoken to, and sometimes not then. Midday. He came in for a plate of whatever was on the stove, ate it at the table without comment, and went back out. Once he said the bread was good. He said it the way a man states a fact. No inflection, no expectation of response. Bertie had said nothing back, and he had seemed neither surprised nor bothered. Evening. He washed at the pump in the yard, came in, ate, and disappeared to wherever he disappeared to. She had noticed by the third day that he never disappeared in the direction of the barn. He went west, toward the stone wall. On the fourth morning, Ezra said without preamble, as she was slicing bread, "I need to go into the lower valley for fence wire. You can come or stay." Bertie looked at the bread. "How long?" "Half day. Back before dark." She considered this. The lower valley meant the road south. The road south meant passing the fork where Wade's man had stood with his company coat and his careful smile. "I'll come," she said. He nodded and went to hitch the horses. The land was vast in a way that Bertie had not fully absorbed from the farm itself. From the farm you saw the immediate, the yard, the field, the tree line, the stone wall. But on the road down from the ridge, the country opened up below them like something exhaled. Wide white valley floor, gray-green sage pushing through the snow, the mountains behind them now instead of above, and ahead, the long pale line of the road cutting south toward Ridge Creek. She sat on the bench beside Ezra and looked at it. She had cooked for wagon trains that crossed country like this for months at a time and never once looked at it properly. There had always been something to stir, something to salt, someone needing something. The land had been background. It was not background today. "You've been here long," she said. Not a question exactly. 12 years, Ezra said. "Alone?" A pause. 4 of those, yes? She did not ask about the other 8. He did not offer them. But the number sat between them on the bench, neither of them looking at it directly. They rode in silence for a while, the runners cutting soft through the packed snow, the horses breathing steam. Then Ezra said, without any obvious reason, "The soil on the west side of the property is shallow, full of rock." Another pause. "Took 3 years to clear enough to—" He stopped. Bertie waited. He said nothing further, just looked at the road ahead with the expression of a man who has closed a door from the inside. She filed it away. They were 2 miles from the farm on the return, fence wire loaded in the wagon bed, the afternoon light going flat and cold, when Ezra slowed the horses without warning. He was looking at the road. Bertie followed his gaze. The snow on the shoulder, softer there out of the main track, held a set of wheel impressions, wide-gauged, heavily loaded. The tread pattern was distinctive. She had seen it 10,000 times from the inside of a supply wagon, staring at the churned ground behind. Wade's wagons. The tracks came from the south and turned east onto a side trail that led up into the timber, not toward the farm directly, but not away from it either. Circling. Ezra looked at the tracks for a long moment, his face doing nothing particular, which she had come to understand was not the same as nothing happening behind it. He turned the horses onto a different trail, longer, steeper, looping north through the timber, before coming down to the farm from above. He did not explain. Bertie did not ask. But she turned once, looking back at the original road behind them, watching the wheel tracks disappear around the bend. She counted the days since she had arrived. 4 days. Wade had been moving in 4 days. She faced forward again. Beside her, Ezra drove with both hands steady on the reins, his jaw set, his eyes on the trail ahead. She watched him from the edge of her vision, the set of his shoulders, the way his right hand held the reins looser than his left. The slight forward lean that she had noticed meant he was thinking rather than simply looking. She was doing it again, noting his habits. She had been doing it for 3 days without fully admitting it to herself. The coffee cup he always set handle east, the way he latched the barn door twice, the particular silence he kept near the stone wall that was different from his other silences. She stopped herself. She looked at the trail ahead instead. The farm appeared through the trees as they came down from the north. The roof first, then the chimney smoke rising straight up in the still air, and then the yard, and then the stone wall, dark against the snow, curved and low and purposeless and permanent. Ezra unhitched the horses without speaking. Bertie went inside to start supper. She stood at the kitchen window while the water heated, looking out at the stone wall in the last of the light. Took 3 years to clear enough to what? The wind came down from the ridge and moved through the stones, the same soft sound she had heard that first night. Not quite a whistle, not quite silence, something in between. The kitchen was small and serious, and Bertie learned it the way she learned everything, carefully, from the edges inward. The stove ran hot on the left. The sourdough starter lived on the top shelf, alive and fed. The flour tin was sealed. The knives were hung, not thrown in a drawer. Someone had cared about this room once, and the caring had stayed in the structure of it even after the person left. On her third morning, she found the tap day on the peg beside the stove, white cotton, wide enough to wrap around her properly without pulling at the ties. She stood looking at it before she put it on. She did not ask where it came from. She did not ask how he had known her size. Later, she would understand that he had not known. He had simply gone to Mrs. Aldridge's store and taken the largest one on the shelf. He had not known her size. He had only not wanted her to be without. She wore it every morning. She told herself it was practical. She watched Ezra Cole the way she watched everything. From the periphery, all cataloging without appearing to catalog, he rose before light, drank his coffee standing at the door, looking east, said nothing until spoken to, and sometimes not then. Fixed the cold cellar hinge without being asked, banked the fire before bed so the kitchen would be warm by the time she rose, left her firewood stacked inside the back door after heavy snowfall. He did all of this without ceremony, without, apparently, expecting anything back. She kept looking for the ledger, the running tally of what he was owed. Every man she had known kept one, visible or not. You took his shelter. You owed him compliance. You accepted his protection. You owed him. She could not find Ezra's ledger. She had tested him twice, left the sourdough uncovered overnight, a mistake obvious to any working cook. He had covered it himself in the morning and said nothing, then or ever. Asked him flatly on a Tuesday evening why he had bought her contract instead of letting Dobbs at the mill take it. He had looked up from his plate. "Dobbs has 6 men and no doors that lock," he said, then went back to eating. She had sat with that answer for 3 days and still did not know what to do with it. On a Thursday afternoon, a young man in a coat too thin for the weather appeared at the edge of the yard. He did not approach the house. He stood looking at the barn, at the stone wall, at the house, holding a folded paper, deciding. Ezra came out of the barn. Bertie watched from the kitchen window. She could not hear what was said. She watched Ezra's hands, loose at his sides, which she had learned meant not yet alarmed. The young man held out the paper. Ezra read it without expression, folded it, put it in his coat. The young man left. Ezra came inside, sat down, said, "Supper ready?" 20 minutes, Bertie said. He nodded, did not mention the paper. That night she lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the paper in his coat pocket, and about Wade Pruitt drinking slow in the Ridge Creek saloon, and about year-round water, and about the railroad surveyor who had come through in September. She did not sleep for a long time. The cold that week pressed against the windows with intention, and the kitchen became by necessity the room where both of them spent the evenings. Ezra at the table with harness leather or tools, or sometimes simply his hands around a coffee mug, looking at the middle distance. Bertie at the worktop or near the stove. They did not talk much. But the silence had changed. No longer the silence of two people bracing for the other one to do something wrong. Something quieter than that. Something that required less effort. She was reaching for the herb crock on the top shelf, standing on a stool, when the stool shifted on the uneven floor. She caught herself. Barely. Ezra was behind her before she had registered the movement, one hand on the shelf beside her head, steadying it, not touching her, just present. A wall of warmth at her back that had not been there a second before. "I've got it," she said automatically. "I know," he said. He stepped back, reached past her for the crock, set it on the worktop, returned to his chair. Bertie stood with her hand on the shelf. Her heart was doing something she had not given it permission to do. She reached for the crock and measured out the herbs with great concentration. That night, she woke at the sound she had been half listening for, the back door opening and closing soft. She went to the kitchen window. He was at the stone wall. The moon was up. She could see him clearly, moving along the inside of the wall, crouching to shift a stone, straightening to set it higher, working without a lamp, without hurry. Each stone lifted with the whole body. She put on her coat over her nightgown and went outside. The cold hit her face like a flat hand. She crossed the yard and stopped at the gap in the wall. Ezra looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been found doing something he had stopped expecting anyone to notice. "You don't have to explain," Bertie said. Something moved across his face. "Clara wanted a rose garden," he said. "Simply, the way you say something that has worn smooth from being carried. She said if I built her something beautiful, she would stay." He set the stone he was holding into the wall, did not look at her. "I cleared the rock out of this ground for 3 summers. Every stone in this wall came out of that soil." A pause. She left before the 3rd summer was done. The wind moved between them. "I didn't know what to do with the wall," he said, "so I kept building it." He looked at her then, directly, without deflection, and his eyes held something she recognized, because she had felt it herself in the marrow of her bones on a supply wagon bench at dawn, looking at gray sky through a gap in canvas. The particular exhaustion of someone who has kept going past the point where going made sense. The cold pressed in from the high ridges. She looked at the ground inside the wall, dark, flat, bare, all that cleared soil, all that work. She thought of the seed packet in her coat pocket, carrot, cabbage, dried beans, practical things, things that grew in rocky ground, things that fed you. "It's good stonework," she said. Something shifted in his face, not a smile, something quieter than a smile, something that had not been there before. "Go inside," he said. "You'll freeze." She went inside, lay down and stared at the ceiling and felt, with a clarity that alarmed her, that something had changed in the last 10 minutes that she could not change back. She was not sure she wanted to. That was the part that frightened her. The seeds went in on a Saturday morning. Cabbage along the south wall, carrots down the center, beans near the north where they could climb. Nothing beautiful, everything practical. Things that would feed someone in October. She was tamping the last row flat when she heard his boots behind her. She did not turn around. The silence stretched long enough that she began to wonder if she had overstepped, if this was the thing that would finally reveal the ledger. "Beans need something to climb," Ezra said. "I know. There's old fence stakes in the barn, left side, near the door." He walked past her toward the house. She sat back on her heels and looked at the turned soil, the small practical rows of it. Her throat did something she had not expected. She pressed her lips together and went to find the fence stakes. That evening, after supper, she was washing the bowls when Ezra said, without looking up from the harness he was mending, "You've been here 3 weeks." "Yes. You haven't asked about Wade's contract, what it says, whether I intend to honor it." She dried her hands on the tap dust slowly. "I figured you'd tell me when you wanted to." He looked up. She met his eyes across the kitchen, the full distance of it. His eyes were gray, the specific gray of weathered fence wood, and they held things carefully. "I don't intend to honor it," he said. "I'm working on the legal side. It takes time." "I know." "While I'm working on it," he said, "you're safe here." She turned back to the wash basin because she had run out of other words, and the ones she had left were not safe to say out loud. Tired. Yet she was not yet asleep when she heard it, pen on paper, slow and deliberate, the sound of someone composing something with care, then the soft compression of a wax seal. His boots crossed the floor. Her door pushed open just enough. "Bertie?" She sat up. He stood in the doorway, sealed letter in hand, his face doing the thing it did when a decision had cost him. "If I'm not here," he said, "take this to Judge Clayton in Ridge Creek, not Sheriff Alderman. Clayton." A pause. "He's an honest man." She took the letter, heavier than expected, his initials in the wax, E.C., firm and clear. "Where are you going?" she said. "Nowhere tonight." He pulled the door back to its usual angle. "I just want you to have it." His boots crossed away from her. She sat in the dark with the letter in both hands, and from somewhere down the road, far enough to be almost nothing, came the sound of horses, more than 2, moving slow, not passing, stopping. Bertie sat very still and listened to the silence that followed. The silence told her everything she needed to know about what was coming. Morning came gray and windless. Bertie had the fire going and the coffee on before the horses outside had fully stopped moving. She had counted them in the dark. 3, maybe 4 sets of hooves, unhurried. The kind of unhurried that belongs to men who know they have the advantage and are not in a rush to use it. Ezra was already dressed when he came through the kitchen. He looked at her face. He looked at the window. He did not tell her to stay inside. She stayed inside anyway, because she wanted to hear. Wade Pruitt came to the door alone. That was the first thing. He left the others at the fence line out of sight, but not out of earshot, and he walked to the door by himself, unhurried, hat in hand, and knocked with the measured courtesy of a man paying a social call. Ezra opened the door. "Morning, Cole," Wade said pleasantly. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Bertie stood at the kitchen window and watched his profile through the glass. He was clean, as always. His coat was good wool. His boots were dry, which meant he had planned the route and the timing carefully enough to avoid the muddy stretch on the lower road. She noted this. She noted everything. "You are," Ezra said. Wade smiled the smile of a man who has been told no so many times it has stopped meaning anything to him. He reached into his coat, slowly, so deliberately showing his hands, and produced a folded document, thicker than the last one, more pages. "I had a conversation with Judge Alderman in Cheyenne last week," he said. "Turns out the original contract, the one Harlan signed, wasn't just a labor agreement." He held it out. "It's a deed of indenture, registered, which means the transfer of obligation is legal under territorial law regardless of what either of us wants." A pause, timed well. "I don't make the laws, Cole. I just read them." Ezra did not take the paper. "What do you want?" he said. "Same thing I've always wanted." Wade's voice was reasonable, patient, the voice of a man who has practiced being the most reasonable person in every room he enters. "The woman works out her contract. 18 more months, as originally agreed. After that, she's free to go wherever she likes." He tilted his head slightly. "Or you can refuse, and I'll have the sheriff here by noon with a warrant. Not for her, for you. Harboring a contracted worker is a criminal offense. Judge Alderman was very clear on that point." The wind came down from the ridge. Ezra stood in the doorway and said nothing, and his nothing was the particular kind that meant he was not deciding. He had already decided, and was simply waiting for the right moment to let the other man know it. "I'll give you until tomorrow morning," Wade said, still pleasant, still reasonable. He put the document back in his coat. "Think it over. Talk to her." His eyes moved just briefly to the kitchen window. Bertie did not step back. He smiled again, put his hat on, walked back toward the fence line. Ezra closed the door. He stood with his back to it for a moment, not moving. His jaw set in the way she had learned meant he was working through something that required patience he was not sure he had. "He'll do it," Bertie said. "The warrant. He'll do it. I know. The judge in Ridge Creek. Clayton can't move faster than Alderman. Alderman's already signed." He pushed off the door and crossed to the table, sat down heavily. "I need 2 more days. Maybe 3. He looked at her directly. "I'm asking you to trust that." Bertie looked at him. She thought about every time she had trusted a man's 2 more days. The way Harlan had said 2 more days about the pay she was owed, 6 months running. The way the wagon master before Harlan had said 2 more days about the sleeping arrangements she had asked to change. The way the world had spent her entire adult life asking her to trust in increments while it moved the finish line. She thought about a sealed letter with E.C. pressed in wax. She thought about the largest tap day on Mrs. Aldridge's shelf. She thought about a man who built a wall for 4 years because he did not know what else to do with his hands. 2 days, she said. Something moved through his face. Not relief. He was not a man who showed relief easily. Something quieter, something that cost him more than relief would have. He nodded once. Outside, the sound of Wade's horses moving back down the road. Unhurried, patient. The sound of a man who believed he had already won. There is a question worth sitting with on a day like this one. We build walls, not always of stone, not always around bare ground, but walls nonetheless, around the parts of ourselves that have been used too many times, around the trust we extended once and did not get back. We call it wisdom. We call it self-preservation. And perhaps it is. But ask yourself this: if someone came along and planted something in the middle of all that careful stone, not something beautiful, not something that demanded anything from you, just something quiet and useful and alive, would you let it grow? Or would you call it trespassing? Because sometimes the bravest thing is not the wall. Sometimes the bravest thing is the seed. Bertie stood at the kitchen window long after the sound of hooves faded. The stone wall was visible from here, the turned soil inside it dark against the snow. The small rose she had pressed flat with her palm 3 days ago. Nothing showing yet. Too early. Too cold. But the seeds were in the ground, and tomorrow morning Wade Pruitt was coming back. Wade Pruitt arrived at 8 in the morning, as promised. He brought 3 men and a deputy, not Sheriff Alderman, who was 2 days' ride away in Cheyenne, but a local man named Croft, who wore his badge the way men wear borrowed clothes, slightly too aware of it. Wade himself rode at the front, unhurried, his good wool coat clean in the early light. Ezra was in the yard when they came through the gate. He had been there since before dawn. Bertie had heard him rise, heard the back door, heard nothing after that, just the cold silence of a man who had decided something in the night and was waiting for the world to catch up. Thus she stood at the kitchen window with her coat on and the sealed letter in her apron pocket. She had put it there before the sun came up. She did not know why. Old habit. Keep the important things on your body. Wade dismounted with the ease of a man arriving at a business meeting. "Morning, Cole." He looked at the yard, the barn, the stone wall, the house. "I'd hoped you'd have the woman ready." "She's not going anywhere," Ezra said. Wade sighed, a small, patient sound, the sigh of a reasonable man burdened by unreasonable people. He nodded to the deputy. Croft reached into his saddlebag and produced a folded warrant, which he held out toward Ezra, with the expression of a man who would rather be anywhere else. "Territorial warrant," Wade said, "harboring a contracted worker. Judge Alderman signed it yesterday afternoon. You can come peaceably, or you can make it difficult. Either way, the outcome is the same." He looked at Ezra steadily. "I take no pleasure in this." "You take every pleasure in this," Ezra said. Something shifted in Wade's face, just briefly, just a flash of the thing underneath the reasonableness, and then it was gone, smoothed back over, professional again. "The law is the law," he said. "I didn't write it." "No," Ezra said. "You just paid Judge Alderman to read it the way you needed it read." The yard went quiet. One of Wade's men shifted in his saddle. Croft looked at his warrant. Wade looked at Ezra with the particular stillness of a man recalculating. "That's a serious accusation," Wade said. "I've got a letter with Judge Clayton that says the same thing in detail," Ezra said. "Names, dates. The surveyor you met with in September. The water rights application you filed in October under a different company name. A beat. Clayton's an honest man. You made the mistake of leaving him out of your arrangements." The silence stretched. Bertie's hand moved to the letter in her apron pocket without her deciding to move it. Wade looked at the house, then directly at the kitchen window, directly at her, and his expression was no longer pleasant. "Get the woman," he said to Croft. Croft started toward the house. Bertie did not think. She was outside before she had decided to go outside. Coat, boots, the letter still in her pocket, the cold air hitting her face as the door swung open behind her. "The letter is already with Clayton," she said. Everyone looked at her. She had not planned those words. They were simply there in her mouth, the way the right tool is sometimes simply in your hand when you reach for it. She looked at Croft, who had stopped walking. She looked at Wade. "I took it to Ridge Creek yesterday morning," she said, "while you were planning your timing." She held Wade's gaze, not defiantly, not theatrically, steadily, the way a woman looks at something she has decided to stop being afraid of. Mrs. Aldred witnessed the delivery. She keeps good records. This was not entirely true. She had not yet delivered the letter. It was in her pocket. But Wade did not know that. And the thing about a reasonable man, a man whose entire power rests on the appearance of having every angle covered, is that the one thing he cannot afford is uncertainty. The one crack in the wall he cannot patch is the possibility that someone moved before he did. Wade looked at her for a long moment. She did not look away. She was 35 years old. She had been a piece on other people's boards for most of those years. She had nodded when she wanted to refuse, smiled when she wanted to leave, stayed when every instinct told her to go. She was done nodding. Wade looked at Ezra, at Croft, at the house. He put his hat back on. "We'll let the court sort it out," he said pleasantly, as if this had been a conversation between equals, as if he were graciously conceding a minor point. He turned his horse. "I'll be in touch, Cole." He rode out the gate. His men followed. Croft went last, folding the warrant back into his saddlebag with the relieved efficiency of a man who had not wanted to use it. The gate closed. The yard was very quiet. Bertie stood in the cold with the letter in her pocket, and her heart doing something large and unsteady in her chest. She became aware slowly that her hands were not shaking. She had expected them to shake. They were not shaking. Ezra turned and looked at her. She looked back. "The letter is still in my pocket," she said. A long pause. "I know," he said. "I lied to him." "You did?" She looked down at her hands, large hands, useful hands, hands that had fed 70 men and never been thanked, hands that had just done something she had not planned and could not take back and did not want to. "I didn't think," she said, partly to him, partly to herself. "No," Ezra said. Something moved through his face, quiet, deep, the thing underneath all the weathered patience of him. "You didn't." He crossed the yard to her. He did not reach for her hand or say the things men say in moments like this. He simply stood beside her, both of them looking at the open gate where Wade's horses had gone, the fresh tracks in the snow already beginning to fill with wind. There is a kind of strength no one puts in songs or stories, not the strength of the raised fist or the loud voice, but the strength of the person who has been made quiet by the world for so long that when they finally speak, the room does not know what to do with the silence that follows. That is the strength that lasts. That is the strength that wins. She delivered the letter to Judge Clayton that afternoon. Ezra drove her in. They did not speak much on the road, not because there was nothing to say, but because the things that needed saying were not yet ready to be said, and both of them were old enough to know the difference between silence that is empty and silence that is waiting. Clayton read the letter at his desk while they stood. He read it twice. He looked up at Ezra over the top of his glasses and said, "I'll have a response to Alderman by Friday." Then he looked at Bertie and said, "You're the one who came up with the delivery story." "Yes," she said. He almost smiled. "Good thinking." She said nothing, but something small and unfamiliar moved through her chest. Not pride exactly, something quieter than pride. The particular sensation of a person who has been competent her entire life, finally being told so by someone worth being told by. She had not known she was still waiting for that. They were back at the farm before dark. Ezra unhitched the horses. Bertie went inside and built the fire up and put the soup on and stood in the kitchen in the warm dark for a moment before she lit the lamp. Just standing, just breathing, the smell of pine smoke and cold earth and sourdough, and the specific silence of a house that has started, without announcement, to feel like somewhere. She lit the lamp. She took off her coat. She untied the tapestry from her waist and looked at it in the lamplight, the white cotton, the wide ties, the careful way it had been folded on that peg on her third morning. She thought about Ezra in Mrs. Aldridge's store asking for an apron for a woman who worked hard, taking the largest one on the shelf, not knowing her size, only not wanting her to be without. She folded it over the back of the chair, her chair, the one she had been sitting in for 3 weeks without either of them naming it as such, and sat down. Ezra came in from the barn. He washed at the basin, sat across from her. She put the soup on the table, and they ate in the lamplight, the fire talking to itself in the stove, the wind outside doing what Wyoming wind does in November, which is everything it wants. When the bowls were empty, neither of them moved to clear them. Ezra looked at the tapestry folded over the back of her chair, then at her. "Clayton will sort it," he said. "I know," she said. A pause, longer than the others. "You could stay," he said, not as an offer, not as a question. As a fact, he was sitting on the table between them, the way he said everything, without ceremony, without expectation. All simply present, simply true. After, when it's sorted, if you want it. Bertie looked at her hands on the table, large hands, useful hands, hands that had spent 35 years feeding other people and never once set a place for themselves. She turned one over, palm up, on the table between them. It was a small gesture, barely anything. The kind of thing that could be taken back, could be explained away, could be folded back into practicality if needed. She did not take it back. Ezra looked at her open hand for a moment. Then he put his on top of it. Neither of them spoke. The fire shifted in the stove. Outside, the wind moved through the stone wall, through the keja, where the cabbage seeds were waiting under the frost, where the carrot rows were pressed flat under her palm, where the bean seeds were tucked against the north wall, waiting for a spring that was still months away but was, for the first time, worth waiting for. Home is not always the place you were born. It is not always the place that was given to you or the place the world decided you deserved. Sometimes it is the place where someone set the largest tapestry on the shelf before they knew your name. The place where a wall was built out of grief and a garden was planted inside it out of something quieter and more stubborn than grief. Sometimes home is not found. It is grown, slowly, in difficult soil, by people who have stopped expecting things to be easy and started quietly to tend them anyway. She had not lost her way. She had lost herself. And that night, in a kitchen lit by a single lamp, with soup on the table and seeds in the ground and a hand over hers that asked for nothing, she began, quietly and without announcement, to find her way back. Was it enough to hold against everything the world would still throw at them? She did not know yet, but for the first time in a very long time, she wanted to find out. There is something I want to say before we part tonight. Not about Bertie and Ezra. Their story will keep warm and quiet the way good things keep when they are finally in the right hands. I want to say something about you. You chose to spend time with this story. In a world that moves fast and loud and rarely stops to ask how anyone is actually doing, you sat with two people who had been worn down by living and watched them, slowly, without fanfare, begin to mend. That is not nothing. That says something about who you are, about the part of you that still believes in patience, in kindness, in the stubborn possibility of starting over. Not everyone still believes in those things. You do. That matters. Bertie carried her weight for 35 years before anyone thought to set down something beside her instead of adding to the load. Ezra built a wall around an empty space for 4 years because no one had told him it was all right to stop. And yet, they found each other, not because the world became kinder, because they did not stop being the kind of people who deserved kindness, even when the world forgot to give it. That is the story. That is always the story. The people who have been put aside, overlooked, sold short, they are not less. They are not broken beyond repair. They are seeds in rocky ground, waiting for someone who knows that the best things grow slowly, in difficult soil, all tended by patient hands. Now, before the next story begins, I want to ask you something, and I mean it without ceremony and without performance. How are you? Not how are things. Not how's the family, how's the weather, how's the news. How are you? The person sitting with this right now, wherever you are in the world. How is your health? Are you sleeping? Is your body being taken care of the way it deserves? Are the people around you seeing you? Not just what you do for them, not just the role you fill, but you, the person underneath all of it? You have carried things too. I know that without knowing your name. Everyone listening to a story like this has carried things. So rest if you need to rest. Eat the soup. Sit by whatever fire you have. Let yourself be, for a little while, the person being tended, not the one doing all the tending. You deserve that. Every single day, you deserve that. Tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. Your city, your country, your corner of the map. Every time I read those comments, I am reminded, across every distance, across every difference, we are all just people who want the same things. To be seen, to be safe, to belong somewhere. You belong here. And if you believe that the hardest journeys lead somewhere worth arriving, stay close. Because the next story is about a woman who was told her entire life that she was too much, too loud, too stubborn, too unwilling to make herself small. She believed them for a while. Thank you for being here. Good night, wherever you are.